Welcome to Positive People Progressing. This is episode number 8. My name is Marty Dickinson with Here Next Year and ProduceMyBook.com. And this whole concept originated because of my book, Lions Always Win, How to Spot What You Want in Business and Life and Get It Too. There is a line in this book where I say, you become the people you hang around. And it is no more true than in the season that we are in with the craziness that's going on in the world. This is your one place every week where you can just hang around real people who are positive and being progressive in their businesses. And I can think of no better example of all three of those things than with Merav Richter, who I've invited to be as my guest today. Welcome, Merav.
Thank you so much, Marty. It's my pleasure to be here. And I just want to give you kudos. You're one of the few people who actually got my name and nailed it down.
Yay!
That's awesome.
Well, we have so much to talk about. My goodness, I'd like to tell you a little bit more from what I've learned just in the short amount of time that I've become known to Merav here. And the first thing is the topic for today is about developing your $1 million story. So I had to have the perfect guest for this topic. I've been wanting to do it for a long time. She is a best-selling author. She has 3 books out. She's a 2-time TEDx talker, and she is also a certified coach with Robbins and Medanes. You're going to have to tell me a little bit more about that sometime. I need to learn more about that. And here's an interesting tidbit. She is also a yoga and belly dance teacher. That's a first. You are also in Toronto, Canada. You are my first out of the US guest. So congratulations for that.
I'm just blowing up all the boxes. Yeah, love it.
So let me just give you a little bit more detail for those of you who have not met her. After a 25-year career in the travel industry, she combined her background in philosophy, her passion for mentoring, her love of exploring cultures of the world, all tinged with her vivacious spirit into her work of heart, helping speakers, coaches, healers, and other rebels to write, publish, and profit from their game-changing books. As a facilitator and corporate trainer, she has helped aspiring authors, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders to craft their life-changing message. Her students have published best-selling books, spoken on many stages, including TEDx's, and have been featured in publications such as Huffington Post, Forbes, Success, and the list goes on and on. In 2019, she launched and executed an inaugural Open Skies for Autism, a simulated flight initiative that gives children with autism the chance to experience all phases of flight. What a concept. Without ever leaving the ground. That's really amazing. Another thing, I will have to bring you in for a whole show just about that. It's amazing how most of the guests I brought on have some sort of philanthropic charitable cause that they support ongoing. So it's awesome.
It's not by surprise, is it?
Right in that line. It's awesome. So her vision for the future is to run that event annually at every major airport in North America and eventually the world. She particularly enjoys finding fresh, funny ways to embrace all of life's turbulent moments, and we certainly have many of those. My goodness.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that in mind, I'm going to hit you with the very first question because time is so short and this 30 minutes goes so fast. Are you ready?
I'm with bated breath. I'm waiting with bated breath.
In the introduction that you provided to me, you mentioned giving voice to the voiceless. Yeah. And I'd like to ask you what in the world that means.
Well, I love that you just said that. So 100%, I realize that that's my, we all have certain human needs, and one of our human needs, it's no surprise that you keep finding yourself around positive people that have a philanthropic, as you said, or a contribution. So we all have these human needs, and some of them are tangible and visceral, right? We need to have clothing, and we need to be fed, and we need to have a roof over our heads. And as we embrace that and embody that and come into the full embodiment, we then have to have a contribution. We then have to, right? That full human expression is that then we actually have to find a contribution. Now, for me, I actually realized that when my daughter was diagnosed with autism, just to say, I have three kids, two boys and a girl, and my daughter's the youngest, and she was diagnosed with autism. And when I was going through the process of understanding what that means and what does it mean to not be able to use your voice, and what does it mean to have certain emotions, thoughts, traumas, feelings, and not be able to actually express them through your voice. And I came to realize that myself as a child, I was selectively mute. If there, if there were testing for autism, I'm sure I would have tested on the autism spectrum then too. Luckily, I was raised by a mother who was a special needs teacher. So she found certain tricks and techniques that she would work with her students and provide those for me. One of them was writing. For me, much like Maya Angelou and much like later on my daughter, writing was an access to be able to give me voice. And so I've made it now my pursuit to find those alternate ways to give people voice. Now, you don't have to be on the autism spectrum to feel that you don't have a voice. Very often, even people who are, I call them the highly sensitive people, people who have always just felt too much, especially right now. The world, right? All of us who are empaths, who feel a lot, we're taking in a lot right now. And very often that becomes overwhelming and we become mute. We feel disempowered to use our voice. And so my contribution to the world is really finding that voice within everyone and giving it voice, giving voice to that part within all of us that is voiceless.
Hmm. Well, we might be able to help some people find their voice today. What do you think?
I hope so. I hope so. Everyone's got that voice. Everyone's voice should be heard, right? We've the human experience, that tapestry needs all of our voices woven into it.
Well, okay. Well, I think a lot of people have been, especially listeners to this particular program and people that I follow and people that are connected with me. I have a lot of people that are budding professional speakers. They're always hearing about stories. They're always trying to hone their own stories. And yet a lot of times a good story really doesn't get honed for years. With all the education there is out there, all the blogs, all the books, all the speaker coaches out there teaching people how to craft their stories, why is it so difficult for people to develop the skill of storytelling? What's the problem?
I love that you asked this question, Marty, and it's so funny. I see this trending in the marketplace. So, you know, a few decades ago, Joseph Campbell came out with this hero's journey template, and he found that, of course, through time immemorial, people have told these stories, and it looks like the hero's journey. And I love Joseph Campbell. I mean, a great majority of my work is based on his philosophy and his understanding and his template. The problem is what's happened with a lot of speakers as we're coming into this era of storytelling as part of our speech templates or story templates. We've only heard of the one template, the one technique, which is called the hero's journey. So very often what happens is someone steps on a stage or as the audience, we hear someone stepping on the stage that has, let's say, had huge loss, or they were drug addicted, or they were, they suffered war or famine, and we think, oh, I don't have a story like that. Or the opposite may happen. They achieved, a PhD by the time they were 18 and sailed to the, sailed across the ocean on a, like, with a sailboat or things like that. And we go, oh gosh, I wish I had something interesting like that. That's a real hero. And so it becomes this sort of like, we think that we need to have one significant pinnacle hero, sort of, I call it the hot mess to success story. Like, and so many people walking around going, gosh, I wish I was drug addicted. I
Yeah.
wish I had, like, I wish I had, had these.
Debilitating illness. I mean, that's really common now with COVID and everything.
Well, and not to say that those stories don't need to be honored. Of course, that's another, there are a myriad of stories that need to be told. But people think that because the hero's journey has become such an iconic storytelling template today, people think that unless they have that kind of a big story, that they don't have, that their story, uh, it doesn't merit. And I'm here to tell you that there are a few other templates that were put to the wayside of storytelling as we celebrated Joseph Campbell's hero's journey over the last few decades. And I'm here to say, let's bring back some of the other templates, because there are some other storytelling templates that we can have. And they are just as interesting and just as engaging and just as inviting. And let's really take a look at teasing those out of everyone's life and
Huh.
everyone's experience. And
You're
even
going
if
to
you're
have to
writing,
give an example of that. You it just drew me right in. Let's go. Give me an example. What's something else I can talk about beside my own hero story, climbing Mount Everest or whatever it is?
yeah, well, exactly. So there are a few different templates, and I'll say, some very often like that hero's journey is really, we look at it as one major life story. Even taking that as a general, with one specific part of your story. So there is sort of like that. I work very often with, let's say, a Freytag's pyramid or a 3-act play, or there is definitely an introduction, a climax, and a resolution. So we do actually have to have that sort of building tension, building tension, building tension, release of tension, and then resolution. So there are a lot of different examples like that. But I'll give you a great example. You mentioned Open Skies for Autism. And how that actually came to be was I actually was working in my previous job, in my previous career, before I started doing my work of heart, uh, at working for an airline. And I started actually when I was 18. I was in my first year of university studying philosophy. And I had been a peacekeeper overseas, and I really wanted to go back to that. And my mom called me, and there was a job opening up as a flight attendant for the airline. And I was 18, and I said, yes. And I went on it and traveled all around the world and had a 25-year career doing that, as well as corporate training and other things within that. Well, a few years ago, my daughter came home from her community class with her friend, and they sat at my kitchen table. And when the mom came to pick the friend up, Angelica's mom came, and they sat at the kitchen table, and they said, gosh, how did you do that for so many years, that flying around the world? We're so scared of airplanes. And my daughter started telling her friend, well, you shouldn't be scared of airplanes. They're not so scary. It feels like going on a car ride. And the conversation goes, and Angelica said, no, but it's so scary, all the noise, and it's so big. And they told me this story that happened to them where they got to the airport. Angelica, being on the autism spectrum, was so overwhelmed with the noise and the security and the rules and the regulations and the people and the announcements. She was so overwhelmed that she went and ran away and hid. And of course, if anyone's ever been at an airport when a child has gone missing, you will know
Yeah.
uh, there is no movement. No airplane is going anywhere. It is locked down. I mean, you have not seen lockdown until you have a missing child in an airport. It is locked down. No one moves. The gates are locked. Everything. Starts to be alarms. There starts to be codes being announced on the intercom. And so this is Angelica and her mom are telling us this traumatic story that the first time Angelica ever tried to fly, she got overwhelmed and ran away, which created this traumatic experience for her mom, for everyone at the airport. Eventually, the police found her hiding under a counter somewhere, and the Angelica's mom and Angelica swore that they would never go through that again. They swore off flying. And as they're telling us this, my daughter Ella is saying, well, Angelica, you should go with my mom. My mom will take you. You'll see, it's not that bad. You already experienced the worst of it. Once you get on a plane, it's actually really pleasant. And I'm saying, you know, I'm nodding. You know what? I could make that happen. And
Yeah.
as I'm saying I could make that happen, Angelica says, could you? And I'm nodding yes. And she says, and do you promise the plane will never leave the ground? And I'm suddenly going, uh-oh, what did I
Uh,
just agree to? Challenge accepted. And I the next day got on the phone and email and contacted every single person who I knew who could make something like that happen, in the key decision places that could make something like that happen. Turned out that not only were most of those people who I contacted touched by autism, had a child who has autism, and so they were involved. They were personally invested in this, but other people were so keen on the vision, were so understood this vision of what I wanted to see happen, that they were on board. And we actually created that as a team. Like we came together as a community to create that, to make my promise to Angelica of a plane having that experience without ever leaving the ground actually happened, made that come true because of the power of that community.
Huh. That is an amazing story.
And do you see how I didn't use the hero's journey template?
That was not a hero journey template at all. That is amazing. That is
So yeah, so I gave that by way of an example, and by way of, because you were asking, is there what else do we have? What other tools do we have to play in with? Anything that you have uh, created that wasn't created before deserves a story, and it has a certain storytelling template or technique that fits with that story.
right.
And
Well,
so,
we both work with authors. Both work with book publishing. So I go immediately to the book concept because I hear stories from my authors every day that
yeah.
I'm working with them, and I try. A lot of times it's only about the story. It only goes as far as the story. And then my question is, okay, well, how do I, 1,000 people, an audience of 1,000 people, how do we apply that story to our lives? So, and they really struggle with this part because they're so engaged with their own story, or even if it is another person's story, of coming up with the point. So how do you instruct people to transition that story, even using your example? How can 1,000 of us out there learn from the story that you just shared?
I love that you just said that. So I actually work on a process that I created called the Swift model. And in that, every story has to have a little wisdom. In fiction, we call that the moral of the story, right? In fairy tales, we have a little moral of the story. We can even say, without giving the story, we can say, don't be the boy who cried wolf. And we don't even have to give the story. We already know that that has a moral, which means, don't have us believe, don't lead us on to something, because then we won't listen to you, right? Every time we tell a story, there has to be a wisdom or a moral attached, so that the takeaway, and that could be one little line or it can be an impression. I call those either nuggets of wisdom, which I call now, or pearls of wisdom, which, much like an oyster, the pearl is marinating in this, in the juice, in the murky juiciness of the oyster. If you
Right.
pull it out too early, it's a rock, but
Hmm.
leave it in there long enough and that becomes a pearl of wisdom. And so that's called a pow. So you can either choose a now for your wisdom, or you can choose a pow for your wisdom. So the now is like giving them the moral right off the bat and then explaining it with an anecdote or a story, or letting the story marinate and allowing the reader, or listener in this case, marinate that and come up with their own pearl of wisdom that they'll take away with that.
That is amazing advice. I hope everyone watches the recording of this and listens to that twice or maybe even 3 times, because you just got $1 million tip right there. I mean, the whole topic for today is creating your $1 million story. And this is it. That is the crux of the process to make it happen. And what is missing between those who do not make that connection of their story to their point versus those who do, the ones that are truly engaging, and you want to read the rest of the book, you want to watch the rest of their speech, you want to take everything that
You
is
want
made
to binge on that Netflix series, right?
absolutely the binge watch, exactly. So there, I mean, that's so important. Now let's transition that statement into another question I have for you that I ask all my guests on this program, because I think it's really important to differentiate before and where we are now. So I want to ask you, there have got to be some key components of storytelling that have worked for years. They've been around for people have been using this technique or just an idea, a concept for the past 30, 40, 50 years, and it's evergreen. You always want to do X because everybody resonates with X, and it's going to be like that for the next 100 years. Is there anything you can think of related to storytelling that fits that model?
I love that you just said that. Now, we're a bunch of word nerds, so you don't mind if I geek out right now, right? Like we
Absolutely.
don't mind if I start
Not at
geeking out
all.
on um so I mean, I did mention Joseph Campbell with The Hero's Journey, which definitely 100% that's iconic. I mean, The Hero's Journey will never go away. I'm not dogging The Hero's Journey, and I say that noticing, knowing that there's a dog poster behind you, but uh Hero's Journey is here to stay. Here's the part that I love, and this is where I can get really geeky. So just go with me here.
Okay.
There was a book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, written by a guy called Leonard Shlain. And that's just fun to say, Leonard Shlain. Apropos of nothing at all, but I'm a big geek, and when I really like an author, I go and find out everything about them. He's actually his daughter, so is actually married to I think it's Mel Brooks. So
Oh,
it's sort of like just a little cute little apropos of absolutely nothing. But Leonard Shlain actually had a great story. He was actually a neuroscientist, and as he would go in and operate on people's brains, he would actually get into this sort of deep meditative state. And as he would operate on these like very, very fine neurons within the brain, he realized that in fact the brain was actually strengthened between left and right hemisphere by the corpus callosum that attaches the two. And he started to theorize that human evolution actually took us from a right brain storytelling element, oral tradition, which he called the goddess culture. And as humanity became more linear and started to develop an alphabet, which actually has us reading in a linear progression, that it created us to be left hemisphere uh, dependent or dominant in our culture. And so that corpus callosum, the highway, the superhighway between the two hemispheres of the brain, started to really strengthen because those messages started to be interpreted between the two sides. And then the beautiful part is, as humanity evolved, we saw this deep integration between sort of those who could read, the powers that be, and those who didn't have access to it. And then we had, the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther's protest of like bringing it to the masses, and of course that happened to coincide with the Gutenberg press, which, no coincidences in humanity's evolution. And so suddenly this linearity became open to the masses, right? So we became, right, this reading culture. Almost everyone on the planet was then expected to know how to read, which is strengthening their left brain.
sure.
Wonderful. And then guess what happens with the advent of technology? This. So we start to go back to this oral storytelling tradition. We are back to the proverbial sitting around the fire, orally telling these stories. We're back to, we have kind of come full circle from being in these small villages and listening to the elders tell the story until and then this huge chasm of time when linearity, when the alphabet took over, and then there was sort of a removed, we were removed from the oral tradition, and now we're coming back into strengthening that left and right brain crossing, right? So the oral storytelling tradition now is more reachable. Like we are actually going through a shift as big as the Lutheran, the Protestant movement, and bringing it back to the people. And what we're bringing back to the people is the oral storytelling tradition.
And we
And
have competition today. because we have video games to compete with. We have all the entertainment shows on, Dancing with the Stars, and the all the competitive um, entertainment shows out there that
Right.
we compete with, because you can't just go on stage anymore and tell a story. It's not enough to just have a great point. You have to have entertainment too, and be, all this
Much
stuff.
like our storytelling grandmothers and grandfathers, and foremothers and forefathers would sit, they would have an entertaining portion to their storytelling.
True, yeah, exactly.
So, it was a full body, it was a tangible experience. It could be with song, and it could be with dance, and it could be, getting into a trance. And I mean, we have kind of come full circle. And the illiterate of today, as opposed to of, a century ago, an illiterate person was someone who could not read the newspaper, right? And we were all advocating for everyone to become literate.
Right,
Today, the illiterate person becomes now the person who does not have the capability of speaking their voice in this new medium, right? The medium is the message. We're
right,
back to an oral storytelling tradition. We're back to that right brain hemisphere, what Leonard Shlain would have called the goddess tradition. And so we're back to this kind of oral storytelling, strengthening our right brain, and connecting. And when I say right brain, it can also be perceived as heart, right?
yeah,
So connect hearts before parts. Connect, we always hear, facts tell and stories sell.
right, absolutely. Yeah, can you believe it? We're almost out of time. I
You
mean,
and I could gab forever.
we're just getting started. We could
I
do that
know.
all day. Well, I want to do two things. Number one, this show is all about introducing people to positive people just like you. So there will be people hearing this for even the next, hopefully, year or two, as I migrate this into a podcast and it's recorded and it's all over the place. I want people to be able to take what they've learned today in this short amount of time and do something more. It doesn't help at all if we just have this program and they take what they've learned and run. What can I do to instruct my viewers to take a next step with you?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to invite people. If you go to www.meravrichter.com uh, /6AA, that's the six author archetype. And it's just a little quiz to assess which author archetype you are. And then they'll be getting into my invited to join my community and come in and have an author experience and learn all of these game-changing book blueprint ideas as they receive my emails. And I'd love to have people join me on these author experience quests. And, as the future opens up and the world opens up, we'll be going on retreats and adventures all around the world. So join me in my email family of word nerds. We're all in this together.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to end this segment here with one last question. I've been saying to people that they really need to practice their presentation skills on virtual live. I mean, for the unforeseen future, this is where the majority of communication is going to be, going one to many in a live setting. I mean, right now, you still can't go to very many live stages and tell your story. So I'd like you to just sort of mesh together what you just instructed everybody, how important it is to be able to craft your story into $1 million story and then bring it to virtual live. How do you put both of those two things together?
I think it's actually the easiest time right now to bring those together. My one of the things I always talk with my mentees, the people, the aspiring authors that I coach, is always to create a story library. And actually, I'll give you a real tangible tip, because a lot of the things I talk about are very woo-woo, but I know you appreciate those things. But I'll give you a tangibility here. Carry a bunch of Post-it notes around with you everywhere you go, and a pen or a Sharpie.
Mhm.
And every time you see, well, in my Swift model, we have, 5 different criteria. So that's story, wisdom, information, formula, and techniques. Every time you think of something or hear something or see something, keep these in your purse, in your briefcase, in your pockets, in wherever you carry, write it down, post it on your storyboard or in your office, and create a story library. And then when we start piecing it together, it becomes that much easier. You actually are a wealth of stories. You just don't realize it yet.
Awesome. We're going to leave that as the final note. I will put your website address under this video after the recording is posted, so we will make it very clear how people can reach you, and I insist that my connections do. I haven't known you for more than 2 weeks, and I've learned so much. I can't wait to learn more. So
Thank you so
thanks so
much.
much for being with us. I'm going to make just a little announcement for next week, because the people that I'm having on this show are just every week, just knockouts every time. And next week will be the same of this amazingness, these people that are so willing to come on this show. Bob Regnerus. I wrote it down in pronunciation so I'd say it properly. Bob Regnerus is the co-founder of feedstories.com, and he is co-author of an upcoming book, Entrepreneur Magazine's Ultimate Guide to Facebook Advertising, edition number 4, which is also co-authored with Perry Marshall, and it is launching later this month. So I'm going to have a scoop interview with Bob. I can't wait. If you are looking for the current, today, up-to-date strategies with Facebook out of all the stuff that you've heard, you need to be watching the show next week. And you can tell that I'm putting this into a sequence, right? I mean, I wanted to have you on here before I had Bob, because what you do with Facebook advertising is you're essentially telling a story, right? And you're trying to get people to buy into your story, and whatever it is that you're promoting out there, you want them to follow that story to you. So that's what we're covering next week. Thanks so much again.
Pleasure, Marty. Thank
The
you.
Positive People Progressing Show, the 8th episode. Much more to come. Remember, you become who you hang around. Stay positive out there, everybody.